All right. So, Ilya, obviously the topic this week that we have to dig into is the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Um, your take on Putin backing out and how the world has responded?
Um, I think that right now Putin would do everything to shell Ukrainian ports. I don't think that Putin would actually touch the convoys, the actual ships which are moving along the Black Sea, and I think that Turkey would do everything to protect the convoys. But I think that while they are still in the cargo facilities and the infrastructure that is related to these cargo ports, I think that's what would be the primary targets for Putin's attacks, and that's what's happening already. So already 2 nights in a row, the missiles were flying in Odessa, in Mykolaiv, and in other Ukrainian ports. Usually the largest port where the grain loading happens.
So, what about the timing of this? A lot of people have associated it with the second bombing of the Kerch Bridge. I don't think that's correct. I think it was convenient, but he was going to do this no matter what, is my suspicion.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's related at all. And it's a coincidence. It's convenience for Putin to say that. That's why. But the decision was taken before that, and I think that's one of the reasons why Erdogan decided to give back Azov fighters to Ukraine. Was exactly because Putin was sending signals that he is not prolonging the deal, and Turkey tried to apply pressure on him. That's so let's do something, but no, that didn't work. The problem is that Putin is again is trying to elevate the bets in this game, and is trying to pressure the world to actually grant him what he wanted from the very beginning, and he wanted the return of Russian Agriculture Bank to the SWIFT system, and he
Yes.
wanted removal of sanctions on his agriculture related exports, including fertilizers and ammonia, which went under sanctions. And in some of those facilities, like with ammonia, he has his personal vested interest. And I think that was the reason. But the problem is that the agreement on this, how this grain deal is structured, is actually three separate deals. One deal is between Ukraine and Turkey about the exports of Ukrainian grain to Turkey. Another is an agreement between Russia and Turkey with the guarantees that Russia is not going to touch those exports, neither the convoys nor the ports. And the third agreement is between Russia and United Nations, that United Nations would do all reasonably possible efforts to achieve lifting those sanctions and return of Russia onto export markets. And so these three deals, they are not interconnected. It's like three separate deals legally. And obviously, United Nations is incapable of delivering on their promises. So I mean, like Gutierrez, as Secretary General, is doing all the reasonably possible effort indeed, but it's all in the domain of the particular national governments. It's not in the domain of the United Nations. So what can he do?
Well, and so the UN is also taking a lot of heat for this as well. I mean, Anne Applebaum yesterday said in a tweet, "We already know the UN is no longer able to keep the peace. If it isn't capable of creating a convoy to protect the export of Ukrainian grain, then it's time to shut the whole institution down. And it sounds like that may indicate a lack of understanding of these three separate deals that you just described.
No, that is correct, and I think that indeed the United Nations is something that needs to be reformed. Because one question, if it is just a discussion club where all the different nations meeting each other and just expressing their opinions, and that it's a conference, then
Yeah.
it's okay, that's fine, that fulfills the purpose, but that's not what was envisioned by Eleanor Roosevelt when she was proposing this in the very beginning, and other allied nations that agreed to form United Nations. It should have been a peacekeeper. It should have been an international regulator in the questions of war and peace.
Yes.
And obviously, to be that peacekeeper, you need to have your own forces, that would ensure peace. You need to have your levers of influence. You need to be able not just to provide carrots, but also to use sticks.
Yes.
And that's what United Nations lack completely. It's a huge bureaucracy, but very important. And I definitely think that after this war is over, I think that we need to initiate a discussion on the future of the United Nations. The new Russia would definitely do this.
All right. So last week, you and I talked about the perception of two different worlds to Prigozhin's mutiny. We talked about how it played out in Russia and how it played out in the rest of the world. Two very different situations, right? It made Putin look good in Russia. It made him look weak in the rest of the world. So I want to play that same game with pulling out of the grain deal. Does this make Putin look strong in Russia, even though it creates all this disarray in the rest of the world?
I don't think that any reasonable number of Russians actually understand what is the grain deal. Even in Ukraine, I would say the majority of population does not understand what it is and how it's structured and what it means for the economy. It's more something like pretty specific. Yeah, obviously, Putin is throwing some bone to some of these Z patriots, the most nationalistic inclined part of the society, which were criticizing him for being too compromised, too soft, too weak, too flexible in interaction with the West. And he is saying, okay, so you see, made a strong move here. But no, I don't think that that makes much of a difference in terms of his popular support. It's interesting what would happen with the rest of the world. It's actually pretty hard to tell for me at this very moment, because with this grain deal, everything is actually very much in the shadows, because if you look at the statistics, who is the main consumer of the grain, there's basically two. It's grain and corn exports. Yes. So who are the main consumers? You would see that number one with a distinct lead is China. Number two, ironically, is Spain. Number three is Turkey. And the rest trail. And like these three countries, they account for more than half, I believe, even 2/3 of the exports from Ukraine. Obviously, then what's happening? Say Turkey imports the grain, then it processes the grain into wheat, and then it's being delivered to some third countries.
Is that where Africa becomes part of the equation?
Yeah, and that's where the poor country is becoming the part of the equation. But if we're talking about direct exports, it's just something like 2-3% goes
Mm.
directly to Africa, and that's why what I'm saying is that it's very much unclear, how that would be taken. But we know that the African countries, they were very actively lobbying for the grain deal, and the visit of African leaders to Moscow was to persuade Putin to actually continue the deal. And I think that what also influenced Putin is this very also unclear situation with the International Criminal Court order and his cancelled visit to the South Africa, where they were supposed to be at BRICS summit. And there were a lot of humiliating statements from there. So it was President Ramaphosa who was calling and asking Putin not to come. Then there was public suggestion that maybe it would be best if it would be Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who would come. Then it was a statement of Vice President in public that, we hope that Putin would not come, that we will arrest him if he comes. And obviously for Moscow, it's like a punch in the face. And I think that's also emotionally influenced Putin's decision.
Does that play out does the average Russian, the typical Russian, know that this is happening and that their leader cannot go to the BRICS summit because of this warrant?
Average Russian, no, but the elites and the elites, whispering to each other about this, and it's it's very humiliating, and it's a very bad sign for them in general.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to the grain deal for 1 second. We talked about the West and this being very disruptive, and it doesn't cast Putin in a good light. I mean, it certainly doesn't make him look like he's cooperative with the rest of the world or willing to be. You talked about how it may make some pro-Putin Russians supportive of him, but I'm wondering how the elites view him pulling out of the grain deal. Supportive, opposed to it, mixed? Where do you think they land?
I think they would rather support, because again, the emotion is that our guy is so weak that he cannot confront nobody, and at least this is some moral satisfaction, because it doesn't change much in the financial equation for the Russian elites. But at least, some emotionally, at least we're doing something. That's how these guys, they usually perceive things. And so I don't think that we have any sociology on this, but emotionally, that's what I would expect.
All right, let's change topics a little bit here. Is there anything you want to say about the Kerch Bridge?
It's still there, but
some of it.
It's like there was a funny joke that 97% of parts of Kerch Bridge still support Putin. So,
were you surprised, or did you have any insider knowledge of this?
No, I didn't have any insider knowledge. I know very well the drone producer for this thing is my good friend, but I don't know who were the people who were actually implemented the operation. Obviously, it was Ukrainian services. I have a strong guess who that was, but let them speak for themselves. But
yes.
I am just like, from the technical point of view, very much satisfied, because I argued a lot inside Ukraine that the missile attacks on Kerch Bridge would be inefficient, that has to be done differently. And so the first attack, which was with the participation of Russian guerrilla fighters, urban guerrilla fighters in Krasnodar. It went well. Also, it was
Yes.
operation from the inside, and now we have these drones attacks, which also was happening from the inside. It's an obvious bullshit what Putin was hinting at, that they were using this cargo grain ships to do the attack. If you look at the map, you will see that's like 600 kilometers away. So
Yes.
no boat would make it. Nobody would even try to do this. Obviously, they were launched from the shoreline on either Azov Sea or on the Black Sea. So it has to be done by certain agents and not by the crews up there in the sea. And that's a confirmation that this type of saboteur attacks are very efficient. With a very minor investment, you can actually achieve a lot of things. So that's for me, it's like moral reinforcement in my position. The rest, I don't share the emotion of the majority of Ukrainians that it would be good to destroy the bridge altogether. I think that this bridge will be very useful for Ukraine after Ukraine's victory. And I think that's a major gift on behalf of Putin to Ukrainian nation, which was done at the expense of a lot of ordinary Russians. But, for Ukraine, I think this bridge would serve in the future very positively. But right now, yes, we need to cut it just to prevent military supplies into the Crimean Peninsula. And what happened is good.
Yeah, and just to kind of recap what you just said, in a future world where there is a free Russia and no war with Ukraine, and the two countries are friendly or allies, that's an incredibly useful asset for trade. And you don't want to destroy it because it's going to pay off later.
Yeah, it was a fantastic plan. I think that would be implemented in the future of a ring road around the Black Sea. And this road completed on the Turkey side, and there was the beginning of the construction on Bulgarian side, but in Russia they were reluctant to put investment across the Caucasus Mountains, but that would be very important. We were debating this when they were doing the Olympic Games project, which is very isolated there in the mountains, and it doesn't serve the purpose of developing all of the coastline. And we were thinking from the very beginning that it would have been the proper objective to construct a major highway towards Sochi, and that would make it more accessible, and tourism-wise, that would have played a very important role on the development of the region. But we are where we are.
Was that happening while you were in the Duma?
Yeah, so there were several plans on this. I was one of the key proponents and authors of the legislation on special economic zones, and one of the application of special economic zones was to create a Las Vegas type zone for gambling, and so it was an idea that we will convert Sochi as a comprehensive entertainment center. It was supposed to have for both the sports facilities and gambling facilities. It was Formula One race, and there was a lot of different things there that were planned. And we had great investors from the United States, which we brought to Russia, that were ready to invest, in Las Vegas type area. And Putin turned it down. He said that he would prefer to keep this type of area separate, and he established its own. It was also established on the Black Sea, but way to the north, and obviously it didn't work because nobody
Right.
wanted to go in the uninhabited place
Yes.
to start doing things from the scratch. So it never happened, and Sochi is still where it was, and the road is not there, and the investment in the Olympics is totally wasted. These sport facilities are in decay. They are deteriorating because they are not being properly used, because not enough people, and then the annexation of Crimea also split the tourism flows
Yes.
away from Sochi. So like everything was done extremely stupidly, in terms of the development of the area.
All right. I want to ask you one last thing before I let you go. I want to let folks know that we got to cut this off really promptly because you're headed to, excuse me, you're headed to a studio in New York for a CNN appearance, correct? You know what time
That's
that's
right.
at tonight?
I think it's 7 p.m. Eastern.
7 p.m. Eastern tonight on
Mm.
CNN. All right. So we learned from the Associated Press this week that Halliburton and is it Schlumberger or Schlumberger,
Schlumberger.
SLB, after Russia invaded Ukraine.
SOB is, you mean son of a bitch? Or was like, what's your, like, it was SOB or Schlumberger?
Yeah, SLB. Yes. Easier to pronounce if you're not sure how to say it. But it appears that they continued to do business with Russia in the case of SLB, even increasing the amount of business they were doing after the invasion. And does this impact their bottom line when this kind of news comes out? Do they care? Does it matter in that industry of oil and gas? And I'm asking you because you actually came from that industry and actually worked for us, what is now called SLB.
Yeah, it's Schlumberger, major oil field services provider in Russia. If in general in the world, Schlumberger and Halliburton was always at peers, they had like almost equal shares of the market, at least comparable shares of the market all the time. They were equal competitors. In Russia, Schlumberger controlled like 90% of the market. And I was really proud because I joined Schlumberger in Russia when it was a company of maximum 100 employees. And when I left, it was something like 5,000, even more. And again, we were a dominant player in the country. Schlumberger is very pragmatic and I would say greedy company.
Yes.
It's really apolitical. It's ready to go in like whatever dubious places in the world, and oil and gas business very often happens, in the very unorthodox places.
Yes.
And so Schlumberger never paid any attention to the politics. Actually, to my knowledge, is like the first example where Schlumberger is pulling out for political reasons from some country. I personally put a lot of effort in this. My friends in Ukraine put a lot of efforts in this. They were putting Schlumberger on the shame list for not doing it before. And I'm glad that they made this decision. The important thing is, I don't know the details on what they are planning to do, but knowing Schlumberger, I think that actually they are not giving away any of their facilities to anyone. But in general, this take on international companies leaving Russia is actually in many cases very beneficial for Putin. Because what is happening, they are selling their assets to Putin's appointed people for peanuts. And very high-profile scandal, which happened just yesterday, I believe. It was Danone, French FMCG producer of different like yogurts and
Yes.
milk products and everything. So they left, and it was an outside management installed by the Kremlin, and whom they appointed Kadyrov's nephew to run Danone in Russia. So Putin is literally giving chunks of foreign assets to the ugliest cronies of his, and that's obviously is the payment for their loyalty, for their service, and that strengthens the regime. when the foreign company is to leave Russia, what we are asking them to do is not to sell the assets. It's just to keep them closed for a while. It's not for a long time, it would be just frozen, but then they would resume their operations normally and they would make even more money.
Yes.
By selling them now, they are getting a fraction of price, but at the same time, they are helping the opposite cause, and that makes me sorry.
Yeah, and I want to point out that you and I had a longer conversation about this last week. So if you're watching and you're interested, go back and watch that video as well. I'm looking at the clock. I've got to let you go. I want to
Yes.
remind everybody, CNN, you said it's 7 o'clock tonight, 7 o'clock
7
Eastern?
o'clock. 7
All
o'clock
right.
tonight. Yeah, that's correct.
Ilya, thank you for taking the time. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you. Looking forward myself. Take care.